My name is Margot Raines, 42 years old, senior compliance analyst at least until 3 days ago. I've spent nearly 2 decades documenting other people's mistakes, tracing every missing signature, every unapproved transfer. Precision was my armor. Silence was my job. But at 11:09 a.m., silence had become a weapon aimed in the wrong direction. The boardroom was too bright, the kind of sterile light that bleaches out guilt but not fear. I sat near the end of the long mahogany table, hands folded, wrists steady. Across from me, Kayla Brooks, 28, HR director, and the CEO's niece was rehearsing her lines again, every word wrapped in nervous polish. She was terminated for a workplace conduct violation, Kayla said, voice trembling slightly. There was a coffee spill, a pattern of disregard for office standards. The federal agent didn't blink. He wore a plain gray suit, binder closed, fingertips resting on its edge like he could already feel the truth pressing to get out. When he finally opened it, the air seemed to shift. Pages rustled softly, like dry leaves before a storm. Clause 17B. He read, his tone almost gentle. Termination of a named federal monitor during an active audit cycle constitutes immediate suspension of oversight funding. Someone inhaled too sharply. The company lawyer's pen slipped from his fingers, hit the table once, and rolled to the floor. No one moved to pick it up. Kayla's smile faltered. That can't apply here. It was a minor infraction. The agent looked up, eyes calm. Then why was it filed as internal misconduct? No one answered. The fluorescent light buzzed overhead, drowning the silence. I sat perfectly still, pulse steady, the same way I'd been taught during audits: observe, record, never interrupt. On the wall behind the agent hung a framed slogan, "Integrity is doing the right thing, even when no one is watching." I almost laughed. Kayla's hands trembled. The lawyer's tie had come loose. Someone whispered my name, half in disbelief, half in regret. And as the room folded into stillness, I remembered the sound of coffee hitting my desk 3 days earlier. 3 days earlier, the morning began like any other, quiet, fluorescent, and 2 shades too cold. My cubicle faced the windowless side of the building, where the hum of the server room was constant, steady, almost comforting. I was finishing a compliance memo about vendor disclosures when my hand brushed the edge of my mug. A few drops of coffee splashed onto the desk, no more than a stain the size of a coin. I grabbed a tissue, dabbed the spot, and kept typing. It wasn't the first mess I'd cleaned up that week, but this one, apparently, was about to cost me my career. Kayla Brooks appeared out of nowhere, heels clicking like punctuation marks. She was wearing one of those tailored pastel suits that looked better on social media than in real light. "Margot," she said, her tone crisp enough to cut paper. "You're aware of the no beverage policy near equipment, right?" "There's no equipment here," I said, gesturing at the empty desk beside me. She crossed her arms. "Still, it's a violation. Optics matter." The leadership team has been talking about standards lately. I almost smiled. Standards, that word again. By noon. She'd sent me an HR calendar invite marked mandatory. Inside the small conference room, 2 chairs faced a wall of motivational posters. Kayla read from a pre-typed document. Every syllable practiced, due to repeated breaches of workplace conduct and disregard for internal hygiene policies. We are terminating your employment effective immediately. My pulse didn't even quicken. Repeated breaches, I asked. Kayla looked down at her paper, avoiding eye contact. We've received reports of similar incidents. From who? She shrugged, rehearsed and hollow. That's confidential. I signed the paper, slid the pen back across the table, and stood. On the way out, I passed the break room. My badge photo had been printed in black and white, taped above the coffee machine. Someone had written across it in red marker, "Terminated for spilling coffee. Do not rehire." The ink bled slightly from the steam of the pot. I stared at it, long enough to feel something shift inside me. Not anger, just clarity. Then I turned, straightened my jacket, and walked out without a word. That night, Richmond was soaked in rain, the kind that makes the streetlights blur into halos. I didn't turn on the television. Noise felt unnecessary. I just sat at my kitchen table, the termination form still folded in my coat pocket, and opened my laptop. Over the years, I'd built a quiet habit no one knew about: a personal backup of every audit, every subcontract, every clause I'd ever touched. It wasn't secrecy, it was survival. When you spend your life documenting compliance, you learn that proof is fragile if you don't keep a copy. The folder was titled Off-Site Archive. Inside were hundreds of PDFs, each named after a contract line or grant number. I clicked through them mechanically, half to numb my mind, half to remind myself I'd mattered somewhere. That's when I saw it, a file I hadn't opened in months. Doe E. Grant 9C Delta Appendix A PDF. I opened it. The screen filled with lines of government language, dense and unfeeling, but halfway down, my eyes caught on a familiar phrase, named Federal Monitor M. Raines. My name, right there. The title sounded sterile, almost bureaucratic, but I knew its weight. I was the listed compliance officer responsible for oversight on one of the company's largest federal energy grants. I scrolled further, reading slowly, until I reached Clause 17B. The words seemed to pulse through the Raines rhythm outside termination of the named monitor during an active audit cycle. For reasons including internal misconduct, constitutes immediate breach of compliance and triggers suspension of federal funding. I froze. Internal misconduct. The same phrase printed on my HR form. I read it again, tracing each word with my fingertip. Kayla hadn't just fired me over a coffee spill. She had unknowingly used the exact legal language that would classify my removal as a breach. For years, I'd written the reports, the disclaimers, the reminders no one read. Now, for the first time, the rules had a heartbeat, and it was mine. The apartment was silent except for the rain tapping against the glass. I leaned back, exhaled slowly, and opened a new document. The subject line typed itself, Clause 17B Confirmation Inquiry. By midnight, the rain had stopped, leaving the air heavy and electric. I sat at my desk, the only light coming from the laptop screen. The words of Clause 17B still flickered in my mind like a warning signal. I knew better than to react in anger. Compliance work had trained me for restraint facts first, emotions later. I opened a new message. The cursor blinked in the to field, waiting. I typed carefully contracts, liaison a Gov, grant office. Gov. Then, without hesitation, I began hello. I wanted to confirm whether any updates are required to the oversight roster currently filed for DOE Grant 9C Delta. I was previously listed as the named monitor. No accusation, no context. Just a question so ordinary it could have come from anyone. I read it twice, checked the timestamp, and clicked send. Outside, a delivery truck rumbled past on the wet street. I leaned back, rubbing my eyes. My pulse had steadied. The fight wasn't with Kayla anymore. It was with a machine that didn't realize which gear it had broken. By dawn, I was awake again, watching light creep through the blinds when my inbox pinged. One new message from Federal Grant Liaison. Subject Re-Oversight Roster, DOE, 9C Delta. It was only one sentence. You're no longer on the clearance sheet. I stared at it for a long moment, the weight of 8 words pressing into me like a quiet verdict. Then I opened a reply window and rested my fingers over the keys. I didn't rush. I didn't gloat. I simply typed the truth. Understood. That's a breach under Clause 17B. My reflection hovered on the dark edge of the screen, tired eyes, steady posture. I hit send. The message left with a soft whoosh, swallowed by the morning. I closed the laptop, poured the last of yesterday's coffee, and let the silence settle around me. Somewhere out there, the system had just stirred, and my name was the stone dropped into the water. By mid-morning, the city was awake, but I was already 2 steps ahead of it. I'd been watching the clock since sunrise, half expecting the silence to break. It didn't take long. At 9:12 a.m., my phone buzzed with a series of short alerts, first one, then another. The grantor's digital portal had logged multiple access pings from Alaris Point, each one tagged Oversight Clarification Request. I didn't need to open the details. I knew exactly what they were scrambling to find. Inside the company, someone had realized my clearance ID no longer appeared on the roster. Without a valid monitor, the audit chain had snapped. The moment Kayla filed that termination under internal misconduct, the clause went live quietly, automatically, without mercy. Every active project tied to my credentials would now be locked for review. I brewed another cup of coffee, the same brand, the same mug. The smell filled the apartment as I refreshed the feed again. The next ping came from the legal department, then one from finance, then a notice marked Urgent Funding Continuity Inquiry. It was happening faster than I thought. The system wasn't angry. It was procedural, cold, precise, and unbothered by human excuses. Somewhere in a downtown office, Kayla would be on the phone with the executives, trying to explain how a spilled drink had turned into a federal freeze worth $40 million. I imagined the conference room voices raised, emails flying, panic spreading like heat through metal. It was the kind of chaos I used to prevent for them. Now I just watched from a distance, calm, detached, a spectator to the logic I'd built. The screen refreshed again. The latest update read, Pending Legal Review, DOE Contract 9C Delta. It was official now. The funding pipeline was frozen until someone could prove compliance. I set my cup down and stared at the rising steam. The same smell that once got me fired was now the scent of their undoing. I didn't smile. Not exactly. I just let the warmth reach my hands and waited for the next ping. The elevator ride to the 14th floor felt longer than it used to. The same lobby scent, cheap citrus cleaner, and old carpet clung to the air. They had called it a clarification meeting, but the presence of a federal agent made the title sound like a joke. When I entered the boardroom, everything was too polished to the long table, the bottled water lined in identical rows, the forced smiles. Kayla sat near the head of the table, shoulders squared, voice already sharpened to a point. She wore authority like perfume, noticeable, overwhelming, and gone too soon. "Thank you all for coming," she began, glancing briefly in my direction. "This meeting is purely procedural. We simply want to clarify the recent personnel transition to maintain transparency." Across from her, the federal agent nodded once. He looked unbothered by the performance, his gray suit creased perfectly, his face unreadable. He set a thick binder on the table, the same kind I used to handle daily. When he finally spoke, his tone was even, almost gentle. "Let's start with the termination report," he said. "Mrs. Brooks, can you confirm the grounds for dismissal?" Kayla straightened her notes. Of course. The employee displayed a pattern of workspace violations, a beverage spill, disregard for policy, basic professionalism concerns. The agent flipped a page. "And you classified the termination under internal misconduct." "Correct." She hesitated. "Yes, as required by company protocol." He closed the binder halfway and looked up. Clause 17B. Termination of the named federal monitor during an active audit cycle, for reasons including internal misconduct, constitutes immediate suspension of oversight funding. The room fell still. The lawyer's pen slipped from his hand, clattering softly against the wood. No one reached for it. Kayla's color drained as the meaning settled in. Her mouth opened, then closed again, words collapsing before they reached air. The agent didn't raise his voice. He didn't need to. "Ms. Raines," he said finally, turning to me. "Your clearance was active at the time of termination. There's been no compliant reassignment filed." I met his gaze. Steady. That's correct. The silence that followed was clean, complete, and final. By the next morning, the requests from the grantor turned into formal notices. Each one carried the same subject line: documentation of monitor transition required. The company had 48 hours to provide proof of reassignment, clearance verification, and continuity logs. I knew they wouldn't find any. Every audit cycle I'd ever managed was time-stamped under my ID M, Raines, compliance. The system didn't lie, and it didn't bend for convenience. Every signature, every flag, every unresolved memo led straight back to me. The same invisible work they'd ignored was now the only thread keeping them from collapse. Inside Alaris Point, panic spread fast. Employees whispered in elevators and private chats. Someone leaked an internal message to a compliance forum who fired the compliance officer during an active audit. Screenshots multiplied. Names blurred out, but still legible to anyone who'd been in those meetings. By noon, Kayla had sealed herself inside her glass office. The blinds were half drawn, though everyone could still see her pacing. Phone pressed to her ear. HR had turned into a fishbowl, every move visible, every word dissected. From my apartment, I watched the notifications unfold in real time. Not from curiosity, but from habit. My inbox filled with auto-forwarded copies of system pings, each one echoing the same phrase, access error. Named monitor not found. It wasn't vengeance that kept me at the desk that day. It was precision, the slow, inevitable logic of a process finally doing what it was built to do. At 2:07 p.m., I opened a new tab and pulled up the form I'd been drafting for weeks, a simple registration for Raines Audit Services. LLC. The digital paperwork was already complete, waiting for one last signature. I entered the date, attached my digital certificate, and pressed Submit. A confirmation window blinked open. Your business registration has been approved. I leaned back and let the quiet settle. The company that had erased my name was now tied to it on every federal record in the system. The first headline appeared just after sunrise. Federal oversight freeze imposed on Alaris Point, Inc. By noon, it was everywhere: business feeds, local news tickers, even the small morning radio station that played outside my apartment building. Each report repeated the same line: all federal funds were suspended pending review. Inside the company, everything stopped. Payment systems locked, project files sealed, card access restricted. What they used to call workflow was now just static. The CEO released a statement within hours. He was stepping down for personal reasons. The press release was polished and hollow, like a door closing without sound. Kayla's name appeared only once, buried in the internal update that leaked later that day, effective immediately. Ms. Brooks has been reassigned to non-operational duties pending internal review. The language was familiar. I'd written versions of it myself for years. Outside, Richmond carried on as if nothing had happened. Delivery trucks rolled through wet streets, and the river shimmered in its winter calm. From the sidewalk, I could see the glass facade of Alaris Point's headquarters reflecting the pale sun. The same windows where my reflection had once stared back, invisible and obedient. My phone buzzed an unknown number. I hesitated before answering. Margot. The voice was quiet, cautious. It's Miranda. Legal division. You probably heard about the freeze. I remembered her measured, sharp, one of the few who ever read the clauses thoroughly. I heard, I said, they're hiring an external oversight firm to handle the review. They need someone without conflicts of interest. You fit the criteria. For a moment, neither of us spoke. The hum of traffic filled the space between us. I'll think about it, I said finally. Good, she replied softly. You built that system. You might as well make sure it survives the cleanup. When the call ended, I stood there a while longer, watching the sunlight break against the glass tower. The building looked smaller now, fragile against the sky. The air was cold, but it carried a stillness I hadn't felt in years, a silence that sounded almost like balance. The contract arrived on a Thursday morning, tucked neatly inside a government envelope stamped with the Department of Energy's seal. I read the subject line twice before opening it. Engagement Agreement External Oversight Review. The client name sat bold at the top. Alaris Point, Inc. For a moment, I just stared at it. 8 years of reports, revisions, and invisible labor condensed into a single line of text. Now, The same company that once taped my picture to the wall was asking me to clean up what they'd broken. I opened a blank invoice, typed slowly Federal Oversight Recovery $51,400. The number felt deliberate, neither punishment nor mercy. Just arithmetic, the value of time, precision, and a system that had remembered me when its people didn't. My new office was small, tucked above a law firm on East Carey Street. 2 rooms, old hardwood floors, sunlight drifting through half-cleaned windows. Dust floated in the air like soft punctuation. I unpacked the essentials first: a laptop, a mug, a framed audit license, and the half-dead plant I'd kept since Alaris Point. The leaves were brittle but stubborn, still holding on to color. I placed it by the window, poured a little water, and sat back. The city below moved with its usual rhythm, buses sighing at corners, footsteps echoing on the brick sidewalks, the faint whistle of a train along the river. Richmond looked the same. But I wasn't. The inbox pinged. Payment received, cleared funds. I smiled faintly and closed the window. The plant caught a sliver of light, a fragile green shimmer along its edge. For the first time in months, it looked alive again. On the desk beside it sat the old folder from my last day at Alaris Point, creased, coffee-stained, still carrying the faint scent of that morning. I thought about throwing it away, but didn't. Instead, I filed it carefully in the cabinet under archive. Some stories deserve to stay recorded, not erased. The morning light spread across the office like something gentle that had taken its time to find me. The air smelled faintly of roasted beans and lemon polish, the simple, ordinary scent of work without tension. My name was etched on the frosted glass door now. Margot Raines, Principal Consultant. The letters caught the sun every time it shifted through the window blinds. I poured myself another cup of coffee. No warnings taped to the wall. No laminated rules about professional decorum. No anxious glances from hallways pretending to be polite. Just the sound of liquid hitting porcelain and the hum of a city waking outside. The plant on the windowsill had grown 2 new shoots overnight. It tilted slightly toward the light, persistent and alive, like it had been waiting for this room all along. I opened my laptop and reviewed a report draft from one of our smaller clients, clean, compliant, simple. My assistant, a quiet young woman named Nina, appeared at the door, tablet in hand. "Morning, Margot," she said softly. "You've got a call from Alaris Point. They're asking if you'd consider leading their appeal." For a moment, I just watched the steam rise from my mug, curling upward like a small private signal. The same company that once erased me now needed my name to exist on their paperwork again. I looked up at Nina and smiled. "Tell them I'm drinking my coffee." She nodded once, understanding without needing more words, and closed the door behind her. Outside, the city kept moving, buses, footsteps, laughter from the bakery downstairs. I leaned back, let the warmth from the cup sink into my hands, and breathed in the quiet. The second cup always tasted better than the first. Not because it was different, but because it was mine.